DDG presents Hands-On Impressions Far Cry 6 from Ubisoft. Hello everyone, my name is Dave Hunt. I'm one of the hosts of Digital Days Gaming, a podcast that releases every Thursday morning 6 a.m. Eastern. We also stream live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Digital Days Gaming, as well as a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Digital Days Gaming. You could be watching this on YouTube with an overview of my hands-on play, or you could be listening to it on our podcast services, and these are both will be the same. The audio will be uploaded to the podcast, and the audio will be embedded into the video on YouTube. This is something I've done in the past, and everyone seems to like it. So if you want to listen, you can listen. If you want to watch and listen, you can do that as well. As always, feedback is appreciated. This was a digital event that Ubisoft invited me to for Far Cry 6. I got to spend about 2 hours playing, 2 or 3 hours playing the game single player, and then an hour playing co-op with an assigned partner. That was at the event as well. This was done through a remote connection, like I've done other ones with Ubisoft with the pandemic going on. I was able to sit in the comfort of my own office and remotely connect to one of their servers and play the game. It ran great. Everything worked. If you see some frame rate dips or some weird, hiccups in the video, that I would probably say is hindrance more to the connection than it would be to the game itself. Obviously, it's an alpha build, a pre-alpha build of the game, and it's still in development as it comes out October 7th on pretty much every platform. PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, Stadia, Luna, and Microsoft Windows Store as well. So obviously, this is a continuation of the Far Cry franchise, with it being the 6th entry. I have some pretty deep experience with Far Cry 5. I was able to play a lot of Far Cry 5. Similar, I got hands-on early impressions. I was able to review it, as well as Far Cry New Dawn, which was a spin-off of Far Cry 5. And then now we have Far Cry 6. So Far Cry 6 is obviously like all the other Far Cry franchise games. It's a first-person shooter. It's being developed by Ubisoft Toronto. And it's the 6th installation in the Far Cry series. And like I mentioned, it comes out October 7th. The first thing that I want to talk about right off the start is the co-op. So co-op has been a bit of a challenge for the Far Cry franchise over the last couple of years, where it worked and it's fun to play with your friend, but progression never continued over or shared. They seem to have solved that problem now to where it is full co-op through the whole game, like it has been previously, but the things that you find and the experience that you gain and that stuff does carry over. I believe that carried over in Far Cry 5, but the story progression didn't. So they're saying that the story progression will carry over in this. And I'll be curious to how that works, just because the little bit of time that I got to play with it, there does seem to be a very, very heavy emphasis on the story this time around. The story has always been important in the Far Cry franchises. It's focused primarily on the villains, obviously. And then this is no different. This one has a villain to focus on, and then you as a character, your character's name is Danny. You can pick whether you want to be a male or female. The character name doesn't change. The voice lines obviously change, but you are a guerrilla fighter. So that and part of the guerrilla fighting, guerrilla warfare is to use makeshift weapons. So there's a lot of materials that you collect in the world that you're picking up as you go, gasoline, parts, paint, just like anything that you're finding out in the world to collect, and you can start making weapons or taking it to people to make weapons for you, as well as you're collecting more materials to generate the mods. So as you pick up more things, you can make your weapons more powerful. There's also a very heavy focus on the superior, which is your powerful weapon, like your backpack. So there's this device that you pick up throughout the game. You've seen it in the trailers where the character's shooting the rockets out of her backpack. That is something I got to mess with. It's very similar to some of the competitive shooters and the multiplayer shooters that we're seeing out there, where over a certain period of time, your high end ability charges up and you're able to use it. And then there's a bunch of different ones that you can get access to in this game as you collect and unlock things and find things in the world to allow you to make different backpacks. And when you make different backpacks, there was one that obviously I got to mess with, the rocket launcher one. And then there was one that was like an EMP. So depending on what kind of what situations you're in as you're fighting in different kind of bases, it still feels very open world. So you can come across things and do things. There does appear to be a leveling system in here as well. So there might be some areas that might be a little bit too hard for you. At first, as you're trying to level your character up, and you'll probably get tons of XP from just playing story missions, but you'll get other XPs from attacking outposts or random things that are happening in the world. So I got a lot of very much of the world of Far Cry 5, which was very, very good. That took place in like a county in Montana that was made up for the game. But you would always run into different, outposts or different bases. And then, with Far Cry New Dawn, you actually had like a home hub where you did a lot of those upgrades. So it looks like they've kind of taken both of those systems and meshed them together. I feel like there's from what I can see, the little bit that I played is that there's a handful of smaller hubs throughout the world, like that you're in, which is supposed to be reminiscent of Cuba. And you have a dictator that is definitely a heavy-handed dictator. So there is, even though they say there isn't, there is definitely some political innuendos that are going on in this game, typical to the previous Far Cries, where you would like Joseph Seed, the cult leader. So there was a lot of religious cult leaders. So there was a lot of things there where Ubisoft, like I've said it before on podcasts and impressions, where they get so close to pushing the envelope, and then they never really like push it over, or they never go off the edge. We have heard over the last couple of year and a half that Ubisoft is definitely focusing on more of a narrative-driven, stories instead of just relying on the open world only. And we'll see. It looks like there is a lot of characters that are in this game. Companion characters that you can pick up, as well as characters that you are helping to hopefully join your rebellion as you fight against the dictator Anton Castillo, who is intent on restoring his nation back to its former glory by any means. His son Diego appears to be a focal point of the story, as well as there's some things that are happening with Diego in the game. I'm going to be very careful not to spoil anything that I was able to play. I don't really feel like I had any major story spoilers, but I do want to respect everybody's opinions and thoughts on when they want to be able to play the game and how they want to be able to play the game, and not to know much that's going on in there. So most of the stuff I'm talking about will have either been shown in the trailer, or you'll see in the coverage that you're watching. But there's a heavy focus on Anton Castillo. There's a heavy focus on your character Danny, who actually gets to speak, which is the first Far Cry character that in a game that I played that I can recall speaking. It's been a long time. So there's plenty to unpack there with the direct story of dialogue back and forth with your character and obviously other non-playable characters, and then the inevitable dialogue, I'm sure, with Anton Castillo. And it typical Far Cry games, like it hits something hits hard right at the beginning to give you your character motivation and the player motivation, and it seemed to be very very, very story driven. Now, gameplay wise, this other than the weapons being unique and crafting and being able to mod things out the way that you choose versus just kind of picking up a weapon in Far Cry 5 or buying them at different shops that you would hit and different outposts. These ones, they all appear to have to be made, like I said, guerrilla fighting and trying to burn the hierarchy regime to the ground. And you'll do that by any means necessary as a guerrilla fighter. But like as I mentioned before, the gameplay didn't feel like it changed very much. They're not reinventing the wheel. They're not trying to do anything. It's a Far Cry game. It's a Far Cry game through and through. First person, like I mentioned, and the weapon, the uniqueness of the weapons and the story, the narrative story is what's going to carry this franchise. If you're looking for some, kind of maybe over the top antics that you saw maybe in Far Cry 5, I don't know if you're going to see those in this one. It definitely is there's a lot of give and take with the non-playable characters that you encounter at different outposts, and some of the issues that they have with some of the other non-playable characters that you meet, and trying to get everybody kind of on the same page. Everybody kind of has their own thoughts and about what's going on in the world and ways to handle it. And to see how this is all going to play out is super interesting to me, and how it's going to play out in a Far Cry style way. is super interesting. We do have an interview to at the end of this episode that you guys can listen to. Again, thank you to Ubisoft as well as the Far Cry team for figuring out a way to make it so I don't have to travel during these pandemics, which is super helpful. And Ubisoft has always been a company that's supported Digital Days Gaming from the beginning, and it's been fantastic company to work for. And again, they were able to provide me access to be able to remotely play. Check out the interview, and as always, feedback is welcome. And thank you guys for listening. All right, we are at a Far Cry 6 preview event. We have an interview opportunity. If you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself and tell us what you do on Far Cry 6, please.
Hi there, yeah, my name's Ben Hall. I'm World Director on Far Cry 6. I've spent the last few years being fortunate to be building this beautiful world of Yara and the activities and missions that you get to experience in Far Cry 6.
Awesome. So I guess just maybe like the quick overview, like what a World Director actually does. I mean, obviously, like the easiest thing to say is you direct the world, but like, what does that really mean? Are you more like gameplay design? I mean, you're not narrative or story driven, so is it mostly the gunplay, or what is it?
It's a great question, and World Director is a job that kind of changes depending on the project and exactly what's needed, but really it is a fusion role of taking and working with the story, the gameplay, the art team, the level design team, and really making sure that all of those things can work within the landscape of Yara, and making a playground for people to explore and experience, and then making the fun elements on top of that. So really it's a hybrid role where it's working a lot with the different departments and making sure that we can create this cohesive, cool, beautiful place that you get to immerse yourself in for hours as you play Far Cry 6.
With it, the Far Cry franchise having over the last couple of years with 4 and 5 and 6 and even back to 3 establishing like the villain as essentially like the main character or being the focal point a little bit. And tell me about the possibility of, or not the possibility, the actuality of voicing a character, because most of the time our protagonist or the protagonist has been muted. So can you like elaborate on some of the challenges that maybe that entailed as a world director?
Yeah, having Danny speak was something we wanted to do from very early on. So really, it actually opened up a lot of opportunities when it came to being able to call specific things out in the landscape and in the gameplay. So when it came to the world and having Danny being able to say things, they can comment on things like tripwires, things like security cameras, different NPCs that you can see or they can see. So it became like a helpful tool that we could use to help feed the gameplay, but also really ground Danny into that world, and then by proxy grounds the player into the world at the same time.
And then what's the core inspiration? I mean, obviously, like Far Cry 6 is, as we've seen in some of the trailers and everything, is going with a little bit more, I guess, like scrap pieces to make weapons. Obviously, in what's kind of deemed to be like a walled off area, like a almost, I guess, maybe third world country style thing where there's not a lot of traffic in and out. So getting certain materials is a challenge, and they're using like they're living off the land and using materials. But how were you able to mix that with the Far Cry aesthetic that the players expect?
Yeah, that's a great question. The philosophy of Resolver was, which is what you referred to there, with this idea of taking things and munging them together to create something different and something exciting or something explosive and chaotic, which is what one's all about. Was a philosophy that we saw when we were doing research and reference into different revolutions throughout history. When you look into the complexity of all of them, typically speaking, there's one side that needs to be able to make do and mend. They need to be able to take what they've got and use it to help push them forward. But it's also something that we saw in Cuba as well, and Cuba being one of the big inspirations for Yara. It was something, the creativity with which things were created for everyday help was something that we really wanted to tap into and actually build into multiple facets of the game. So it's not just in the weapons, but it's also seen in the vehicles. It's seen in the houses, how people utilize different elements in interesting ways. But it also comes through to the way the world's being used as well. So even the military, to some extent, will be using this philosopher of Resolver, taking locations and they had an everyday purpose, like a school, for example, and switching it out and utilizing that school as a prison because they needed that space during this conflict and during this aggression that they're going through. So the resolver philosophy runs through everything, and then the pinnacle of that really becomes the resolver weapons, which is these weapons where you can take things like a motorcycle engine and some sardine cans and fuse them together and create a cool weapon that gives you more power and lets you fight like 100 against this regime that's attacking. So it really got born from reality and realism that we witnessed, and then we built into that creativity and wrapped it around everything that was Resolver.
And can you speak onto, I hope I'm saying it right, like the Supremo weapon, or like the, I guess like the, I mean, it seems like essentially like a super weapon, something that you build, and then you build it up and then you can use it, but it's not something you can use on demand. It has a cooldown, like the inspiration or the building behind that.
Yeah, the Supremo's the backpack, so you get to wear a different backpack as part of your loadout that comes with a particular play style, and it really came down to this idea of making one guerrilla fight like 1,000, which is the philosophy that Juan Cortez has, who's a character you'll meet, and he becomes your kind of your mentor, but he's also like a mixture of Q and MacGyver. He takes things and puts them together to create chaos. That's what he's about. And what we wanted to do with that was allow Danny to have these abilities that let them fight back against this regime. So when you come up against a tank, what are you going to do to fight against that? You're going to need something to be able to help you out, and that's where the Supremos come in with the backpacks, and the Resolver weapons come in, which is these modified, constructed weapons that Juan creates, and they give you that edge and they give you that ability to play in a specific style. They also impact different missions and different scenarios differently depending on which one you've got. So you might take the one that fires the volley of missiles, which is great if you find yourself in a situation surrounded by tanks and vehicles. You can use that to give yourself the upper hand for a short amount of time before you make your next move. Or you might go in with like the Volta, which is an EMP system. So if you utilize that up front, it changes the battlefield in front of you and around you. So they impact the choices that the player gets in terms of play style.
The gear system that, I mean, I've only been able to play for a little bit, but I'm already seeing what looks like the possibility of gear sets like poison protection or fire protection. So kind of as you're moving, I'm assuming as we're kind of progressing through the storyline and through the campaign, there's going to be certain scenarios that we go into that we might need to protect ourselves from poison more than fire, or fire more than poison. And then I think I've even seen like ammo sets. Can you kind of like briefly speak about the inspiration behind essentially like what looks like gear sets to me?
Yeah, for sure. The gear sets really came down to when we were discussing about freedom of choice and allowing players to be able to push themselves into a different type of play style, and also give themselves advantages, like you say, in different scenarios. So the gear sets that you'll be able to, or the gear pieces you'll be able to find around the island, you'll be able to put these together, and some of them will give you specific advantages against different situations. And this really comes into the idea that the military themselves have each got a strength and a weakness, and then as you work your way through different scenarios, depending on how much time you've spent exploring and upgrading different pieces of gear, you'll be able to kick yourself out in a specific way to give yourself the upper hand. And it all plays back to this idea of the balance of power, and the fact that during a revolution, during this guerrilla situation you find yourself in, the balance of power really is firmly with Anton and his military. They've got equipment, they've got vehicles, they've got ammunition, and then you as a guerrilla need to kick yourself out in a specific way that you want to as a player, with player choice, but also as different situations unfold that we've crafted to push in certain directions. Kind of like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of fire in this mission, so if you were to kick yourself out with the fire retardant gear, gives you an opportunity to be able to give yourself the upper hand in that situation.
And something that we found out in the presentation that I know a lot of our community that listens to the show is I think will be very happy about, and I just want to double confirm it, is that full co-op for the whole game, and then the player gets to both players get to keep the progression now, right?
So, yep, co-ops have been a big feature that we've been looking into, at making sure that we can balance out the fairness between you and your co-op partner. So you get to keep the the things that you collect, the things that you find, so weapons, gear pieces, XP that you get along the way, and as you go through the journey with your co-op partner, you get to experience the missions in a fair way. You get to see your character in the cutscene. So we really wanted to make sure that co-op became something that you could both experience together, and you get to take a lot of that content with you back into your game.
That's awesome. Is there anything else that you want the player base to know about Far Cry when they play it in October? Far Cry 6?
Just that, I can't wait for the players to be able to get a hold of Far Cry 6 on October 7th. So, yeah, I wasn't expecting that question.
Yeah, no, it's something I always try to throw at people. So awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your play session.
I will.